Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The silent cry for help. The night had a strange stillness to it, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It wasn't just the usual quiet of a late shift. It was heavier, pressing down on the streets, making everything feel frozen in time. Officer Daniel Reed sat in his patrol car, fingers idly tapping on the dashboard as he watched the dimly lit road ahead. The radio crackled occasionally, but nothing major came through. It was just another routine shift, at least. That's what he told himself. His wife's voice echoed in his head from earlier that evening. "Stay safe tonight, and don't fall asleep in the car," she had teased, kissing him on the cheek before he left. He had chuckled, promising her that nothing ever really happened in their sleepy little town. But as the low growl of an approaching engine broke the silence, Daniel's instincts kicked in. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching sight of a car speeding down the street, barely slowing as it blew past a stop sign. He straightened up. That's not normal. The street was deserted, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows as he flipped on his patrol lights. The red and blue glow reflected off the cracked pavement as he pulled onto the road, closing the distance between himself and the speeding vehicle. The car, a beat-up green sedan, hesitated for a moment before veering to the side of the road and rolling to a stop. Daniel parked behind it, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, as he took a steadying breath. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way the car slowed just a fraction too late, or the way the taillights pulsed unevenly, flickering like a heartbeat, or maybe it was just his gut, that deep, unshakable feeling that he was about to step into something far more dangerous than a routine traffic stop. His boots crunched against the pavement as he approached the driver's side window. The glass rolled down halfway, revealing a man with neatly combed hair and a well-ironed shirt, a little too put together for this time of night. "Evening, officer." The man greeted with a practiced smile, his voice smooth and polite. "Is there a problem?" Daniel tilted his head slightly, scanning the man's face. There was something off in his expression. Not fear, not even nervousness, but something restrained, controlled. "You ran a stop sign back there," Daniel said evenly. "License and registration, please." "Of course," the man said, reaching for the glove compartment with an easy, almost rehearsed motion. He handed over the documents. Thomas Blake. Daniel glanced at the papers briefly before his eyes flicked toward the back seat. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, sat stiffly in the back. She clutched a worn-out teddy bear to her chest, her tiny fingers curled so tightly around it that her knuckles had gone white. Her blonde curls framed a pale, frightened face. Her blue eyes, wide, unblinking, stared straight ahead, as if looking anywhere else might be dangerous. Daniel's stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong. "Who's the girl?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The man let out a light chuckle, glancing over his shoulder. "Oh, that's my daughter, Emily. She's just exhausted. We had a long day visiting family out of town." Emily didn't move. She didn't blink. Daniel crouched slightly, shining his flashlight just enough to get a better look at her face. The beam caught her wide eyes, and for a split second, just a fraction of a second, her gaze flickered to him. There was a silent plea buried in those eyes. "Emily," Daniel said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Her lips parted just slightly, but no words came out. Instead, her fingers tightened around the teddy bear, squeezing it so hard that its worn seams strained against her grip. And then her lips moved, just barely. Daniel felt his breath hitch as he saw it, the faintest, quietest whisper, a movement so small that anyone else might have missed it. 2 words. "Help me." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. His grip on the flashlight tightened as he straightened up, his mind racing. "She's fine, officer," Thomas said smoothly, his voice perfectly controlled. "Like I said, just tired." Daniel studied him, the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, the way a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool night air. His instincts screamed at him, but the law was clear. Without probable cause, without something concrete, he had no right to detain them. He forced himself to nod. "Make sure you come to a full stop at signs from now on," he said, handing back the documents. "Of course," Thomas said with that same polite, empty smile. "Have a good night, officer." The car pulled away, its taillights glowing in the dark. Daniel stood there, his breath shallow, his mind screaming at him to do something. Emily's face burned into his memory, her silent plea. "Help me." His jaw clenched. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his notepad and quickly scribbling down the license plate number. "I'm not letting this go." The radio crackled. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed," he said, his voice sharp, urgent. "I need a plate check. Green Sidon, license number 7B426, possible child endangerment." Static filled the line for a moment. Then, "Plate registered to a Thomas Blake," the dispatcher confirmed. "Clean record. No warrants." Daniel exhaled slowly. Clean record meant nothing. His gut told him otherwise. He sat back in his patrol car, gripping the wheel, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then, in the stillness of the night, a memory flashed through his mind. Emily's lips moving, the words forming in the silence. "Help me." Daniel's decision was made. He put the car into gear, his jaw set with determination. He wasn't going home tonight. He was going to find Emily, and he was going to make sure she made it home safe, no matter what it took. A trail of shadows. The cold night air pressed against Officer Daniel Reed's face as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind a storm of thoughts. He had let them drive away. He had watched the green Sidon disappear into the night. Emily's silent plea still burned into his brain. A mistake. He had made a mistake. Daniel had always trusted his instincts. It was what made him a good cop, not just by the book, but by the gut. And tonight, his gut was screaming louder than it ever had before. His fingers hovered over the radio as he ran over his options. The dispatcher had told him Thomas Blake had a clean record, no red flags. But clean records meant nothing. Monsters didn't always have criminal pasts. They were just good at hiding in plain sight. And yet, despite the fear in Emily's eyes, he had no concrete reason to stop them. No evidence. No proof. No warrant. But something deep inside him knew, if he didn't act now, he might never see that little girl again. He took a deep breath, exhaled, then reached for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need additional intel on Thomas Blake. Any known addresses, recent travel records, anything that might give me a lead." A pause. Then a crackle. "Copy that, Officer Reed. Stand by." Daniel leaned back in his seat, eyes trained on the empty road ahead. The longer he waited, the further away they got. He needed to act fast. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he knew by heart. Jessica Parker picked up on the second ring. "You're calling me in the middle of the night," she said, voice groggy but instantly alert. "What happened?" Daniel wasted no time. "I pulled over a green Sidon. Thomas Blake. He had a little girl in the backseat, Emily. 7 years old. She didn't speak, didn't move, but I swear to God, Jess," she mouthed the words, "help me." Silence. Then a slow exhale. "And you let them go," Jessica murmured, more a statement than a question. "I had to," Daniel said, frustration seeping into his tone. "I had nothing to hold him on. No report of a missing child. But my gut, Jess, My gut is telling me that girl isn't supposed to be with him. There was a rustling on the other end, likely Jessica getting out of bed. All right. Let's figure this out. You got a plate number? Already ran it, Daniel said. Car's registered to him. No priors, no warrants. But something isn't adding up. You think she's a kidnapping victim? Daniel clenched his jaw. I think she's running out of time. A deep sigh. Then Jessica's voice sharpened, all traces of sleep gone. Give me 5 minutes. I'll see if any missing person reports match her description. The line went dead. Daniel tossed his phone onto the passenger seat, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. He needed more. He needed to know where Thomas Blake was heading. His eyes flicked to his patrol laptop. A thought struck him. Traffic cameras. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he accessed the city's surveillance feed, scrubbing through the footage from the stop sign violation. He watched the grainy video, his own patrol car pulling up behind the sit-in. The moment Thomas rolled down his window, the shadowy figure of Emily frozen in the backseat. Daniel rewound the footage, zooming in. Then he saw it. Just before Thomas pulled away, just before Emily turned back to face forward, her lips moved one more time. Not help me. A name. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Cooper. His heart pounded as he grabbed his phone again, dialing Jessica's number. She picked up immediately. Got something for you, she said before he could speak. An Amber Alert was issued 5 days ago in Fairview. Missing girl, Emily Cooper, age 7. Last seen at a park. Description matches what you gave me to a T. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Cooper. She hadn't just been asking for help. She had been trying to tell him who she was. That's her, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's the missing girl. Jessica cursed under her breath. We need to move now. Where are you? In my car, looking at traffic camera footage, Daniel said. Last known direction of travel. Heading toward Route 19. If he's taking back roads, he could be anywhere by now. Then we need to track him. Jessica's voice was firm. I'm calling the Fairview PD to alert them. You go after him. But Daniel. I know, he said, already shifting the car into drive. I'm not letting him slip through my fingers again. He sped down the empty streets, his headlights cutting through the darkness. He didn't know where Thomas Blake was heading, but he was going to find out. He had to. Because now, this wasn't just about instinct. This was about saving Emily Cooper before it was too late, racing against the clock. The night stretched endlessly before him, a dark expanse of empty roads and flickering streetlights. Officer Daniel Reed's patrol car cut through the silence, the steady hum of the engine barely drowning out the pounding of his heart. The radio crackled. Reed, this is dispatch. We've got an update on the Amber Alert. Fairview PD confirmed Emily Cooper was last seen 5 days ago at a playground near her home. No solid leads, until now. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. Any known connections between Thomas Blake and the Cooper family? He asked, his voice edged with urgency. A pause. Then, negative. No record of prior interactions. Blake has no children, no known relatives. He's never been flagged in any missing persons cases before. Daniel clenched his jaw. So if Thomas Blake wasn't a relative, if he had no legitimate reason to have Emily with him, then who the hell was he? His gut twisted. The way Emily sat in that backseat, clutching her teddy bear like it was the only thing tethering her to safety, the silent desperation in her wide eyes. It was more than enough for Daniel to know she wasn't there by choice. Reed, you still there? Daniel blinked, snapping back to the present. Yeah, I'm here. Do me a favor, pull up any past reports of suspicious activity involving Blake. Anything, even if it was dismissed. Copy that. Stand by. Static crackled, then silence. Daniel exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Where was Blake taking her? He forced himself to think like a predator. If he had taken Emily, he had a destination in mind. Somewhere remote. Somewhere safe for him, but not for her. Then it hit him. He's not just driving around aimlessly. The green sit-in had been moving fast. Too fast for a casual drive home. Blake had a plan. A route. A final stop. And Daniel needed to find it before it was too late. His laptop screen glowed as he navigated through traffic camera feeds, tracing the last known direction of the car. He found the footage from a nearby intersection, scanned for the sit-in. There. It turned onto an old county road, one that led straight out of town. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that road. It led to an area mostly abandoned, a stretch of forgotten land with broken-down motels, closed truck stops, and empty gas stations that no one cared about anymore. No streetlights, no cameras, no witnesses, a perfect place to disappear. He grabbed the radio. Dispatch, I have reason to believe Blake is taking Emily to an isolated area just off Road 19. I need all available units to converge near the old Fairview truck stop. Copy that. Units are en route. Daniel floored the gas pedal. The patrol car surged forward, tires screeching as he took a sharp turn. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the long, desolate road ahead. 15 miles away, the inside of the sit-in was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road. Emily sat in the back seat, her tiny hands trembling as she clutched her teddy bear. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought the man driving might hear it. She didn't know where he was taking her, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going home. Thomas Blake's grip on the wheel was tight, his knuckles pale. He hadn't spoken in miles, his jaw tense, his eyes focused straight ahead. The occasional streetlight illuminated his face, and Emily could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He was nervous, and that scared her more than anything. She had tried to speak when the police officer had stopped them. She had tried to tell him, "Help me. Please, help me." But her voice had refused to come out. The fear had been too strong. And now, the officer was gone. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had to be smart. She had to think. The road ahead was getting darker, emptier. She had to act before they reached their destination, before it was too late. Slowly, carefully, she reached down, her small fingers brushing against the seatbelt buckle. If she could just unbuckle it without him noticing. A small click. Blake's head snapped to the rearview mirror. "Emily." His voice was sharp, a warning. "What are you doing?" Emily froze. She swallowed hard. I'm hot." Blake studied her through the mirror, his eyes narrowing. A tense silence stretched between them. Then, finally, "Just sit tight. We're almost there." Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't want to know what there was. Her fingers tightened around the teddy bear, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She had one chance to escape, and if she failed, she didn't even want to think about it. Back to Daniel. His foot pressed harder against the accelerator, the patrol car roaring down the empty stretch of highway. The radio crackled again. "Read, dispatch. We found something." Several past reports of a man matching Blake's description seen near schools, parks, and playgrounds. No charges, but multiple parents reported him acting suspicious around children. Last known address before Clearview was Fairview. Daniel's breath hitched. Fairview. The same town where Emily had gone missing. It all clicked. Blake had been watching, stalking, waiting for the perfect moment. Emily had never been just a random child. She had been targeted. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. How far is he from the Fairview truck stop? About 5 miles. Daniel did the math in his head. If he was right, if Blake was heading where he thought he was, then he only had minutes to stop him. His foot pressed the gas pedal harder. Emily's face flashed in his mind, her tiny hands gripping the teddy bear, her lips forming the silent words, "Help me." Daniel had let them go once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Ahead, the road stretched into darkness, and somewhere up there, Emily was waiting for someone to save her. This time, Daniel wasn't going to let her down. He was going to bring her home, no matter what it took. The final pursuit. The sirens screamed through the dead of night, cutting through the silence like a knife. Officer Daniel Reed gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his heart racing to match the roaring engine of his patrol car. The old highway stretched before him, dark and empty, the moon casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. A storm of thoughts clouded his mind, but one image burned through them all: Emily's terrified face in the backseat of that car. Time was slipping away. Every second that passed, Thomas Blake was getting further ahead. Every second that passed, Emily was in more danger. Daniel leaned into the radio. "Dispatch, how far out are the other units?" A crackle of static, then a voice. "ETA 10 minutes. State troopers are setting up a roadblock at the next major intersection." 10 minutes. Too long. Blake wasn't going to the next intersection. Daniel knew it now. He wasn't taking major roads. He was slipping through the cracks, heading somewhere remote, somewhere off the map. Daniel needed to catch him before that happened. His gut had never steered him wrong before, and it was screaming at him now. He reached for his radio again. "Jess, tell me you got something." Detective Jessica Parker's voice came through, tense and focused. "I pulled old property records. Blake used to own a hunting cabin about 20 miles outside of Fairview. He never sold it. It's abandoned, but it's still in his name." Daniel's heart pounded. "Send me the coordinates." "Already did. If he's heading there, you're the only one close enough to intercept him." Daniel checked his GPS. The turnoff for the old hunting grounds was coming up fast, a narrow dirt road, barely visible from the main highway. He's taking her there. If Blake made it to that cabin, the chances of finding Emily alive would shrink. Daniel didn't wait. He flicked off his headlights, killed the sirens, and veered off the highway onto the dirt path. His patrol car jolted as it hit uneven ground, the tires kicking up dust and gravel. The trees closed in around him, their branches clawing at the sky like twisted fingers. The road was tight, barely enough for one car. But up ahead, faint taillights in the distance. Blake. Daniel's pulse surged. He was closing in. He reached for the radio. "I have a visual on the suspect's vehicle. Moving in now." Jessica's voice crackled through. "Daniel, wait. Don't engage alone. Backup is on the way." She doesn't have time to wait. Daniel floored the gas pedal. The patrol car roared forward, closing the gap between them. Blake must have seen him in the rearview mirror because the sedan suddenly swerved, tires skidding in the loose dirt. He was trying to outrun him. But there was nowhere left to run. The road was narrow. Trees loomed on either side. A dead end was coming up fast. Daniel knew it because he had seen the maps. Blake either didn't know or he was desperate. Daniel gritted his teeth. "You're not getting away." He reached for the loudspeaker. "Thomas Blake, pull over now." No response. The sedan jerked violently, speeding up, weaving through the narrow road, trying to shake him. Daniel's stomach tightened. If Blake crashed, if that car flipped, Emily would be trapped inside. He needed to stop him, but he needed to do it carefully. His eyes flicked to the road ahead. Just beyond the trees, the land dropped off into a steep ravine. He doesn't know it's coming. Daniel inhaled sharply. He had one shot. He gunned the engine and moved alongside the sedan, his patrol car scraping against branches and bushes. Blake swerved violently, trying to ram him off the road. Daniel barely avoided the hit, jerking the wheel to counter. But now he was in position. With precision, he tapped the sedan's rear bumper, a calculated maneuver. The sedan wobbled. Then, the tires skidded. The car spun out. Blake lost control. The green Satan fishtailed wildly before slamming sideways into a tree with a deafening crunch of metal. Everything went still. Smoke curled from the hood of the wrecked car. Daniel didn't hesitate. He threw open his door, his gun already in his hand. "Blake, get out of the car." No movement. Daniel's chest rose and fell with deep, controlled breaths. Then, the driver's door creaked open. Blake stumbled out, his face bloodied, his eyes wild. Daniel aimed. "Don't move." Blake ignored him. Instead, he turned toward the backseat, toward Emily. A surge of adrenaline exploded in Daniel's veins. "No, you are not touching her." He moved. In a blur, he closed the distance, tackling Blake to the ground. They hit the dirt hard, the impact knocking the wind out of both of them. Blake thrashed, kicking and clawing, but Daniel was stronger. With one swift motion, he twisted Blake's arm behind his back and slammed the cuffs on. Blake let out a guttural, furious growl. "You don't understand." Daniel shoved him down, pressing a knee against his back. "I understand plenty," he said, breathless. "You stole a little girl, and now you're done." Blake struggled for a moment longer, but it was over. The adrenaline didn't fade. Not yet. Not until... Emily. Daniel's head snapped up. The sit-in. The backseat. He pushed off Blake, rushing toward the wreck. The door was locked. Emily was inside, motionless. Daniel's heart pounded. Emily. She didn't move. Without hesitation, he slammed his elbow against the window. The glass shattered. He reached in, careful to avoid the shards, and unlocked the door. He pulled it open. Emily flinched. Daniel's throat tightened. "Hey, sweetheart. It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now." Emily's blue eyes blinked up at him, wide and terrified. Then, slowly, her tiny lips trembled, and she whispered, "You came back." Daniel swallowed hard. He forced a smile, even as his chest ached. Yeah, I did." Her fingers uncurled from the teddy bear. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, she let go. She reached for him instead. Daniel didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, cradling her close. Emily buried her face against his shoulder, her small body shaking. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, holding her tight. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise." Behind him, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Backup had arrived. But it didn't matter anymore, because this time, he had saved her, and nothing else mattered. A new beginning. The world outside was still a blur of flashing lights and distant voices, but for Officer Daniel Reed, time had slowed to a crawl. He could feel Emily's tiny frame trembling against him, her breath warm against his shoulder. He held her tight, as if loosening his grip would somehow let her slip away. The nightmare was over. She was safe. And yet, even as the weight of the night pressed down on him, he knew that this was just the beginning of her journey back to a normal life. The sirens that had once been deafening now faded into the background as other officers arrived on the scene. Detective Jessica Parker was the first to reach him, her sharp eyes scanning the wreckage before settling on Blake, now pinned against a squad car in handcuffs. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Daniel nodded. "She's okay. That's all that matters." Jessica glanced down at the little girl in his arms. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm Detective Parker. You're really brave, you know that." Emily lifted her head slightly, just enough for Daniel to see her face. There was something different in her eyes now. Less fear, more, something else. Trust. She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I going home now?" The question hit Daniel like a freight train. Home. The word held so much weight, and yet he had no idea where her home was anymore. Jessica crouched to Emily's level, her expression warm but serious. "Your parents are going to be so happy to see you," she reassured her. We're going to make sure you get back to them, okay?" Emily nodded slowly, but Daniel could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The damage was already done. She had been taken. She had spent 5 days in fear, not knowing if she would ever see her family again. And even though tonight had ended in rescue, it didn't mean that the nightmares would end with it. Daniel had seen it before. The way trauma clung to people, how it changed them, how it made them afraid even when there was no longer any reason to be. But he wasn't going to let that happen to Emily. Not if he could help it. A paramedic approached, his expression careful. "We need to check her out, make sure she's okay," he said, motioning toward the ambulance. Daniel looked down at Emily. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, hesitantly, she reached up and clutched his uniform. She didn't want to let go. Daniel's throat tightened. He knelt down, still holding her close. "Emily," he said gently, "these people are really nice. They're going to make sure you're okay before we take you to your parents. But I'll be right here, okay?" Emily studied his face, her small fingers still tangled in the fabric of his shirt. "Promise?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled. "Promise." Finally, she loosened her grip. The paramedic lifted her into the ambulance, speaking to her in a kind, soothing tone. Daniel watched as she lay down on the stretcher, her teddy bear still clutched tightly to her chest. She looked so small, so fragile. And yet, she was here. She had survived. Daniel exhaled slowly, standing up as Jessica came to stand beside him. "You did good tonight," she said, crossing her arms. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past the wreckage, past the flashing lights, past everything, toward the road that had led him here. If he hadn't trusted his instincts, if he had ignored the way his gut had twisted when he saw her in that backseat, she wouldn't be here. That thought settled deep inside him. Jessica nudged him lightly. "You know, I think you just became someone's hero tonight." Daniel let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "I don't need to be a hero," he said. "I just needed to be there when it mattered." Jessica smiled. "Well, you were." A few minutes later, Emily's parents arrived at the scene. Daniel watched as a woman with tear-streaked cheeks ran toward the ambulance, her voice breaking as she called her daughter's name. Emily sat up at the sound, her eyes widening. "Mommy." And then, she was in her arms. The sobs that followed were raw, overwhelming, full of a relief so profound that Daniel felt it in his own chest. Emily clung to her mother like she was afraid she might disappear again. But she wouldn't. Not this time. Not ever again. Daniel turned away, giving them their moment. He knew how this worked. There would be reports to file, statements to take, paperwork to drown in. But none of that mattered. Not right now. Right now, the only thing that mattered was that Emily Cooper was going home. And for the first time that night, as Daniel walked back to his patrol car, he let himself breathe. Because tonight, he had made sure that someone's story didn't end in tragedy. Tonight, he had saved a life. And that was enough. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.